The Art of Leaving traces my, or attempts to trace my story from childhood to motherhood. And it explores the ways in which grief and loss at an early age shaped my life, and how growing up, and the choices I made in my life, and how growing up Mizrahi in Israel affected the choices I made in my life and my life growing up. Yeah. So I grew up in a very mixed environment. I lived in a neighborhood that was traditionally Yemenite, but it was gentrified already. And like, for example, the street where I lived was very mixed, and I would even say more Ashkenazi. The school that I went to was mixed. So I think that I would have had a very different experience had I lived in a traditionally Yemenite neighborhood, like the one that my parents say were raised at. But for me, I can say that it was very clear growing up that, from books that I read, from television, from movies, even commercials, from the lack of representation in the media, that was what I wanted to be was not who I was, that I wanted to be Ashkenazi, that I wanted to look a different way, that, I never saw a character like me represented in literature or in the books they assigned to us in school or in television. So this kind of a mission, this kind of erasure really teaches children something, whether we want it to or not. Um, so that is the biggest, I think. When I think of my childhood, it's more than the. It's not like I've never had experiences of being discriminated in a very direct way, but it's that omission, I think, that was the biggest issue growing up, especially for a child that read so avidly, and never ever saw a girl like her, or a character like her parents or her grandparents in books. Um, Apart from that, I did visit my grandparents' neighborhood, the one that I said that is still up to today quite traditionally Yemenite, in which was only maybe 10 minutes away from my house, but still it felt to me very much like a world away. It was Yemen to me because I didn't know anything about Yemen. Like I wasn't taught anything about it, definitely not in school. So it was like where I was kind of immersed in the language, in the music, in the smells of the cuisine, and in the feeling of the culture. Every time that we went to my grandmother, which was quite often. Um, so yeah, of course, there's much more to it, but you might have to read the book to find that find out. Yeah. So my father had an enormous influence on my life. I was always that kind of daddy's girl. We had a lot in common. He was a writer, closeted writer. He only published like one poem once, but he loved books and he loved reading. And he as soon as he realized that I was a writer, because I was from a very early age, that was something that bonded us. He once placed a book, a shoebox on my desk and wrote on it masterpieces and filled it up with books that he thought I should read, and then we can talk about it. He wanted to read everything I wrote. I would always come to him with, here I wrote this story, and I actually start the book with a scene very much like that, because that was not only a huge influence, but because he died when I was a child, it almost felt like a type of, I'm looking for the right word in English, not, more than an instruction, but almost a legacy, or a call to write that was in his inheritance in a sense. So yeah, he was definitely and it wasn't just the writing, like after he died, we found out about the acts of generosity and charity that he's committed throughout his life, in silence, really. Things that we didn't know about and only came to light after he died, because these people came to us and told us. So that is another, huge legacy that I try to keep in my heart and pass on to my own child. With my grandmother, it was a bit different, because growing up, I write in the book that spending time with her was not my idea of a good time. We had a very prominent language barrier. She spoke a little bit of Hebrew, but it was thickly accented, and we didn't really understand each other. Like we had a serious gap there. But also she was like, the kind of grandmother that didn't have any toys in her house or candies. It was very austere kind of living, sorry. There was no, she wasn't the kind of grandmother that took you out to a cafe. She's never sat in a cafe, like, that was just not the kind of thing she did. So only later in life, I think, when I started sort of yearning for my past and for my background, that I came back to her and I started asking questions, and I started, wanting to get to know her better, wanting to know her story and to understand something about myself and about us, the family. And I'm really glad that I did that, because I got to spend some time with her. And then a few years later, she passed away, and I recorded some of her conversations, and I was able to actually include some of them in the book. And they're verbatim, because I could, transcribe them from the videos that I've taken of her. So yeah, she did have a huge influence on me, but not as a child. Only later in life, when I started to appreciate her and her story more and understand it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and very astute, because I think about it now, right? Obviously, I wrote the book from a distance, being able to look at my life, and I needed that distance. That's why it took so long to write, because I needed to be able to understand some of the events that happened in my life more clearly, and for that you need distance. And I realized that it was that, losing a parent at a young age, I feel like it really shatters your sense of home. It shakes the foundation of your house. And because I grew up with such a fractured sense of home and belonging, I think my way of dealing with it, my defense was like, well, I don't need it. I can just be on my own and I'll be fine. That's a very young and kind of immature way of defending oneself. But I was young and I was immature. And that's when I just took off and decided, I'll be free. I don't need anything. But of course, it is actually very much, an entwined thing, right? It's two sides of the same coin. It's, yeah, two sides of the same coin, that need to be free, and that, yearning to belong. And after doing that for a few years, traveling and wandering and, believing myself to be free, I think I realized, before I realized, I think I felt a need, I felt afloat. I felt a little bit untethered, and I felt like I was yearning for some roots and some belonging. And that is exactly when I started to, talk to my grandmother. That's when I started to make those connections home, like learning certain recipes from my mother, starting to reread my father's poetry, and all these ways that I can, find a connection, or some sort of a belonging, some sort of a sense of home, even from afar, because back then I was still living in Canada. So yes, that's kind of how it played out. But absolutely, it was a constant sort of conflict between the two. even when I long to be free, I think what I really wanted is to belong. Yeah, it is. It is very much connected to the previous question. I think in my years of wandering, in my years of leaving, I made myself believe that it was that I perfected it into an art. And again, that was, you know, me trying to own it, and you know, like believe that this is what I want to do. This is a choice. This is what I'm good at. You know, obviously, there's no art to leaving. It's a fractured. It's a messy thing. But that was kind of an act. It was an act of self-convincing, in a sense, that I became that. You know, like I say in the book that I wore it on my head like a crown, you know, and pleased to be different. But yeah, but it definitely, yeah, it goes back to that question from before, that um, it really was a yearning for something else. Yes, and yet there's still a lot that I wish I didn't lose. One thing is the language. I wish that I spoke it, or Arabic in general. You know, I know basic stuff. I worked for a few years as a restaurant in a Lebanese restaurant, so you know, I figured out some things. But I feel like, and I have all these like certain words in Yemeni that just kind of stuck because they were spoken always in my family. But I really do wish that I didn't lose that. Um, and I'm still endlessly interested in it, and there's still it's not over, you know, the depth uh of cultural wisdom and tradition that I have yet to tap into. You know, I'm there. I'm still asking, I'm still searching, I'm still learning. I'm learning to sing, for example, the songs of Yemeni women. um yeah, like I want to learn to dance, you know what I mean? Like there's other things that I feel like I'm not, that I could still um tap into. So I'm not done, but I do feel a lot closer. And I think a part of coming back home is it's a huge part of it, of that, you know, like being here, being close to my mom, being close to um, people of Yemeni, other people of my, you know, the same background, which is something that was hard to come by living in Canada. Yeah, I find it's always interesting with both of my books to see that people connect to it, that people relate to it, that you don't expect necessarily to connect to it. You know, like you feel like you're writing something very, very small, like of a very small community, and yet it resonates with, say, other immigrants, you know, who've found themselves distancing themselves from the background and then finding their way back to it. I think in my own experience as a reader, sometimes I find myself reflected in unexpected places. So I totally get that, but it's such a joy when that happens. Actually, just yesterday, a friend of Lebanese descent said to me that he found that his my book really opened his eyes to the ways in which we are similar, and the history that we share as Arabs and Jews, and you know, the Jews that lived in the Middle East, who spoke the same language, often had the same mentality and the same customs and sort of, you know, that kind of thing. So that to me that meant so much to me to hear, because I think it's really important, you know, like to create something that um, rather than exclude, sort of brings people together. So that made me really happy, you know, to be able to show a different facet of Jewish experience, a different facet of Jewishness, you know, especially because in North America, and I assume it's the same in Australia, the Jewish experience is fairly Ashkenazi and Eurocentric. So it's always good to complicate that a little bit. The only and why am I laughing? I'm laughing because it's actually not funny at all. It's quite sad. But no, I am actually very settled. I am happy. You know, in the past 2 years living in Israel, since I moved to Israel, I had to go to North America. I had to fly quite often because my audience is still mostly North American. I was invited to do a lot of lectures, and that was hard, and I didn't really want to go. You know, like I went because it's great to engage with audiences, and it's, of course, you know, you got to eat, but it was hard to leave my daughter mostly. So there is something about having children that really grounds you, and I think that's why the book ends with motherhood, and the book ends with a chapter or an essay that is titled "The Art of Returning," or "The Art of Staying," actually, right? Which is definitely an art. But why was I laughing? Because I have to say that you know, having rockets thrown on you does make one consider leaving. That was tough because I felt so settled and so happy to be here before that happened. And suddenly, you know, like running to the shelters in the middle of the night with your child. Yeah, that was tough. That was tough.